So for the Designer Series Week 9, we have Sheila Levrant de Bretteville, who is a professor and director of studies in graphic design at Yale University. She studied art history at Barnard College, Columbia University, and received her MFA in graphic design from Yale. Her work as a graphic designer, educator, and public artist stimulates awareness of the people, subjects, and voices that dominate culture. That dominant culture often fails to accommodate or celebrate, and reflects her belief in the importance of user participation in design. Her public artworks and graphic design are widely published, and her work is represented in collections and exhibitions. De Bretteville established the first women's design program at the California Institute for the Arts in 1971, and also founded the Women's Graphic Center at the Women's Building in Los Angeles. And she is an American, and she was born in 1940. So this is, again, one of the artistic interviews. That what is good design? This one is an extended interview. So the question is, politics and ethics, how do they impact your work? For me, politics and ethics are more about then. Consider all others as equals is both a political and ethical concern. My thoughts move towards ways of making that provide models for inclusion. Who and what has been overlooked and devalued, and how I can bring those at the periphery into public view. This concern and wanting to keep ambiguities and contradictions intact has been a defining factor in my work as a designer, artist, and educator. Every year I shudder during the admissions process, even as we make those kinds of discerning and exclusionary decisions. I think it is important not to make overstatements about what we as designers do. So is humility important in your work? Yes, I find the hubris of the U.S. abroad and at home odious and totally lacking in humility. In opposition, if for no other reason, I want my work to be expressive of humility, a contribution in its own modest way. Can graphic designers contribute socially? Designers have to make their own choices as to how best to contribute to our shared culture. All graphic design is by its nature social. So it is a matter of which kinds of social engagements are most desirable to you. I tend to make choices on the basis of whom I want to spend time with as much as the type of project it is. I want to support those working on social change. But the people who work from a moral high ground are not necessarily the people with whom I want to work. I would rather donate to social causes than pour my creative energy into projects that provide what is not already in place, where the people most need what it is I do best. An objective for designers is to find clients who want what it is you want to do. It's a more equal exchange that way. That is what our students try to do by creating a body of work that clearly has a coherent visual method, and then looking for clients whose content is most open to the way they, as designers, want to work. So do you often work with local communities? Yes, I do not trust large organizations and generally try to stay below the radar of the power structures in which I live and work, making my contribution as directly as possible to the community in which I am working. This is equally true whether it is a donation to a pastor in a church in New Orleans after the flood rather than to the American Cross, or in my site-specific work, or in teaching. At a site or even at Yale, I like to be the first to hang out in a community where I will be doing work. getting a sense of what and who is there, and trying to find out what could enhance opportunities to hear and see one another better. It is always a negotiation, but less with who is paying me. It is more with those who are there now, as we weave their narratives with those who were there before them. Now that I have done this with many people, Japanese Americans in Los Angeles, African Americans in New Haven, and a very eclectic mix of working poor in Boston and Rhode Island, I have found some themes that reoccur in neighborhoods with immigrant populations. I have found an affinity with these kinds of issues and connections, even though I am white, middle-aged, a middle-caste woman, albeit the daughter of Jewish Polish immigrants. Are designers sometimes self-obsessed? Perhaps we ought to consider being selfish as underrated and misunderstood. Without a sense of self, it is much harder to be honest about why we do what we do. A healthy self-interest is just the kind of focus a graduate student needs to sustain an intense interest and commitment to the development of their work. They are taking the time to find out what they do best and to enhance and enrich that inclination and skill with the extraordinary resources here at Yale. Our whole graduate graphic design program has been developed to enable our students to take advantage of the entire university. Can we devise ethical codes of practice? Perhaps the first need to recognize that ethical dilemmas are in everything we do, and be tolerant because we all make mistakes. As a parent, you have to believe you get more than one chance to say the right thing. Every day is a new day in which you get to say that which will best guide your child. The objective is to enable them to think for themselves, to do the right thing in whichever society they find themselves. This is the goal not only for a parent or a teacher, but for the viewer of work too. We're talking about small and thoughtful choices, small devices. It is important to remember that ethical considerations aren't clear-cut and are often contingent inventions. I use question marks or ellipses in my work to imply this lack, that everything is not resolved, not everyone is included here, and thus to make a place for absence with the whatever. So, what practical example might there be? A starting point is developing an ethical code of graphic design practice could be to look at areas considered by other professions. In print graphics, let's look at the way costs are hidden as perks of the job as an example. This should include markups on print. Many designers carry the printing costs and add a percentage on top, but don't tell the client. For me, this is an act of deception. It was first suggested to me by a printer who said all the designers she worked with in Los Angeles did it. I prefer to be transparent with my clients, so either I tell them this is the case or I just don't do it. I understand designers justify doing this by saying they don't feel able to charge adequately for their time. Regardless of this, I just don't do it. It has to do with how I feel. I do not intend here to extrapolate big moral issues from small actions. It has to do with what makes me feel coherent. So what about the respect for others? Which others? If we think of respecting the people who see the work as the client, how does the work change? It has become increasingly important to me to devise ways of welcoming the viewer into the creation of meaning in my work. I started inserting ambiguity and various meanings and voices, some over obvious and others less so, and then later leaving. Let's also consider how we think about the clients who pay us for the work. Clients have knowledge, just as designers do. Sharing this is a respectful exchange. This is about equity and engagement. This is true of teacher, student, client designer, and people in the neighborhood designer relationships. Students need to see see a life of constraints and limitations behind and in front of them, and want new ways to work that respect them and their way of working. Are there clients we shouldn't work for? The number of areas that designers would really choose not to work in are very limited. Some would design ads for cigarettes and others would not. I use graphic design to say that it is not in my name that America has gone to war with Iraq. Others would not. We make these choices finally because of who we are and how we want to be in the world. From a teaching point of view, I try to be very careful about positions of moral superiority and do not assume I know what others think or are aligned with. There is a kind of hubris that comes with thinking that what you make is for the social good and on a higher moral plane than the other graphic design work. I recoil from that kind of self-importance and exceptionally prideful display of goody-goodness. So is it necessary to be happy in your work? Happiness, like comfort, is overrated. Both can breed insensitivity to those without the accessibility and possible privilege to have either. Whose happiness is more important, mine or someone else's? What makes me happy may make another person unhappy, and that in turn makes me unhappy. That is why contradictions and ambiguities are important in my work, in teaching, and in the admissions process. The discomfort anyone feels about a work or action can be enhanced to that person and to a community. So is there a relationship of beauty to ethics? Even if only for a moment, if a work of design can be transcendent for someone else as well as the maker, it is not only worth doing, but it is also, in a sense, beautiful. I have noticed that the B word has been more or less acceptable at different times, but traditionally, it is the subject of philosophical debate. I am inclined to diffuse and decentralize the idea, as each person's beauty is different. Traditionally, unbeautiful things can evoke feelings of delight. For example, I grew up near Coney Island, an amusement park in the southernmost tip of Brooklyn, New York. Even though most of it is tacky and dangerous, I continue to be attracted to the beauty of the twinkling lights. Although it's not healthy food, I think it's magical to see sugar turn into candy floss. No surprise, then, that I love putting broken mirror among the Italian Silver Teresa in my A-Train project, making that dismal place sparkle. And, at least for me, beautiful. It seems to me that we're not living in a very beautiful, ethical, or delightful time. It is not that I want to give design a trivial role, but perhaps there simply could be more delight and playfulness. There is too much hubris and potential for damage in being inspiring. I do see people having a hunger for respite from the grind of every day and the egregious behavior of the world at large. So I hope you enjoyed the interview with Sheila Levrant de Bretteville, very social-minded designer, and there are certainly lots of those out there. So have a great day, have a great week, and enjoy. Bye-bye.